The scent of roasted chicken and disappointment. That's what Sunday dinners smelled like at my parents' house. I'd walk in, and the air would just thicken, the aroma of thyme and rosemary mixing with the heavy, unspoken judgment. My mother, Helen, would kiss my cheek, her eyes already scanning my outfit. The same faded band t-shirt, the slightly worn sneakers, the jeans that were probably a size too big. "Alex," she'd sigh, which was her opening salvo, her way of saying, "I see you're still not trying." My father. Mark wouldn't even look up from carving the bird. Just a grunt. Oh, the entrepreneur is gracing us with his presence. It wasn't a compliment. It was the verbal equivalent of an eye roll, a jab wrapped in a greeting. They thought my job was a joke, a prolonged adolescent fantasy I stubbornly refused to outgrow, a polite fiction we all maintained so they didn't have to call me unemployed. While my cousin, Golden Boy Greg, was busy making partner at his law firm, stacking his 401k and buying a sensible sedan, I was tinkering. That was their favorite word for it. Tinkering in my cramped, leaking garage apartment, fueled by lukewarm instant noodles and an internet connection that buffered every time it rained. They saw poverty. They saw a failure to launch. They saw their 28-year-old son playing with computers instead of climbing a real corporate ladder, and it baffled them. It wasn't just confusion. It was embarrassment. They couldn't brag about me at their dinner parties. I was the family's dirty little secret, the liberal arts degree that went nowhere. What was I actually doing in that garage? I was building an ecosystem, a decentralized, encrypted, peer-to-peer data sharing protocol. It sounds dry, I know, but I knew with a certainty that burned in my chest that it was the future of digital privacy. It was complex, it was revolutionary, and it was completely impossible to explain to two people whose idea of high tech was successfully programming their DVR. "So, Alex," my father would inevitably say, wiping his mouth with a napkin, the signal for the Inquisition to begin. "How's the thing? Still making your little computer games?" I always tried to explain. "Dad, it's not a game. It's a dynamic backend utilizing sharding to..." And his eyes would just glaze over, a curtain of polite disinterest falling. He'd chuckle, a deep rumbling sound that rattled my bones. "Sharding! That sounds painful. Helen, did you hear? He's sharding in the garage now." My mother would force a strained, tight-lipped smile. "Mark, be nice. Alex is creative." Creative was their code word for unemployable. She'd then turn to me, her voice dripping with that manufactured, suffocating pity that was so much worse than my father's open scorn. "Honey, Mr. Henderson down at the bank said they're hiring tellers. Good benefits. A dental plan. You get weekends off. Wouldn't that be stable? A dental plan." I was sitting on 3 separate venture capital offers, 2 from Silicon Valley and 1 from Singapore, totaling 8 figures. I was running a team of 12 developers across 3 different time zones. I was busy negotiating server contracts worth more than their mortgage, and my mother was offering me a job where I could get my teeth cleaned twice a year. The laughter was the worst part. It wasn't loud, booming mockery. It was worse. It was the quiet, shared chuckle across the dinner table. The "oh, you kids" laugh. The "he'll grow out of it eventually" laugh. They'd talk about Greg's new BMW. They'd discuss the neighbor's daughter getting a promotion at the insurance firm. And then they'd look at me, the family charity case, the starving artist. Last Christmas, my father had cornered me by the fireplace and slipped a crumpled $100 bill into my jacket pocket. "For groceries," he'd whispered, patting my shoulder with a heavy, disappointed hand. "Don't tell your mother. We're worried about you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to show them the wireframes, the user acquisition data, the burn rate, the runway. I wanted to tell them that the $100 he just gave me was, rounded to the nearest decimal, 0.0001% of what I'd paid in AWS server fees that month. But I couldn't. It wasn't time. The humiliation was a fuel. Every "when are you going to get a real job" was a gallon of high-octane gasoline. Every pitying look was an accelerant. I'd just sit there, eating their slightly dry roasted chicken, nodding along to their terrible financial advice. Alex, have you considered just selling your idea to Google? I just absorb it. I let them see the struggling tinkerer. I let them believe I was one bad month away from moving back into my childhood bedroom. Why? Because explaining it was impossible. How do you explain the value of something that doesn't exist yet? How do you describe the scale of a digital revolution to people who still write checks at the supermarket? You don't. You just build. You build in the dark. You build in silence. And you let the condescension echo in your garage until it becomes a motivator. They laughed at my poor job. They laughed at my tinkering. They laughed because I didn't have a business card or a commute or a dental plan. They saw the grubby clothes, not the lines of code. They saw the instant noodles, not the infrastructure. They saw a son who was a failure, a disappointment who couldn't even afford a decent haircut. They had absolutely no concept of what was coming. They had no idea that their unemployable son was about to change the very concept of data security. They had no idea that the magic internet money they mocked was about to buy their entire street. The laughter stung, yes, but the silence I knew would be deafening. They just needed to see the validation, not from me, but from the one source they still respected, the one source they considered the absolute gospel of success, the one magazine sitting on my father's mahogany coffee table, the one he read like a Bible every single month. They just had to wait for the next issue. The next Sunday felt different. It felt final. The air wasn't just judgmental. It was thick with a pre-planned ambush. I knew it the moment I walked in. My mother, Helen, didn't just give me the pity smile. She clutched my arm, her knuckles white, her voice a strained whisper. Alex, honey, we need to talk. After dinner. A family talk. My father was quiet, too quiet, methodically sharpening his carving knife with a rhythmic metallic shing 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 that set my teeth on edge and seemed to scrape directly against my spine. The pot roast was dry, the gravy lumpy, as if the food itself was bracing for impact. We ate in a suffocating, charged silence, the only sound the scrape of forks on my mother's best porcelain. Then came the coffee, and with it the intervention. Alex, my mother started, placing her hand over mine on the table. It felt less like a comfort and more like a trap, a small, soft spider pinning me in place. Your father and we've been talking, and we're just so worried. Worried. That was the scalpel they always used, the one they wielded with such devastating, loving precision. This project of yours, she continued, her voice trembling with manufactured concern. It's been 5 years. You're not getting any younger. You look thin. You look lost. My father chimed in, putting down his coffee cup with a decisive courtroom clack. It's time to stop, son. This tinkering has to end. It's not healthy. It's an obsession. You have responsibilities. I started to formulate the usual defense, the "it's going well, Dad," the "we're in the middle of a new funding round," but he cut me off with a sharp slice of his hand. No, listen to me. We have a solution, Greg. Greg has an opening. My blood ran cold. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees cooler. He needs a new paralegal, my father continued, his voice adopting the tone of a man delivering a generous, life-saving gift. It's good money, Alex. Real money. Benefits. A 401k. You'd be in a suit. You'd have a future. He's willing to do you the favor. A favor. Working for my smug BMW driving cousin, filing his briefs, fetching his coffee just to earn the privilege of being called a real adult at their dinner parties. The humiliation was so profound, so absolute it was almost paralyzing. I felt the burn of tears, not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated volcanic rage. I was managing a global team of 40 engineers. I was on the phone with venture capitalists who managed sovereign wealth funds. I had just turned down a 9-figure acquisition offer, and my parents were offering me up as a charity case to Greg. I was about to snap. I was about to stand up, throw the damask napkin on the table, and tell them about the Series B funding, the $200 million I'd just secured, the $1.2 billion valuation, the entire goddamn thing. I was going to burn this beige bridge and salt the earth behind me. I pushed my chair back, the legs screaming a protest against the hardwood floor. And that's when I saw it. It was lying on the mahogany coffee table, right where it always was. The new issue. The mail must have come while we were eating. It was sitting there, so innocuous, gleaming under the brass reading lamp. My father hadn't read it yet. My heart didn't just beat. It detonated in my chest. The air left my lungs. The entire launch, the years of work, the sleepless nights, all of it, suddenly felt like it was shrinking, focusing down to this single, stupid, surreal moment in this suffocating living room. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the table. My father, mistaking my stunned silence for capitulation, for shame, pressed his advantage. It's the real world, Alex. It's not about changing the world with your protocols. It's about paying your bills. It's about stability. It's what real success looks like. He gestured vaguely toward the coffee table, toward the magazine itself, the ultimate symbol of his entire worldview. You look at these people, he grumbled, his voice full of disdain for a world he didn't understand. These tech billionaires, they're just kids who got lucky. They're not substantial. It's all just funny money. Not like the law. Not like banking. He was on a roll now, picking up steam, the patriarch laying down the law, the final judgment. You need something tangible, something real. And then, in a move that sealed his fate, he reached over and picked it up. He picked up the magazine. He didn't even look at it. He was using it as a prop, waving it in his hand to emphasize his point about funny money and unsubstantial kids. You look at the cover of Forbes here, he said, tapping the glossy paper with his thick, angry finger. It's always some 20-something in a hoodie who just sold some ridiculous app for $1 billion. It's a bubble, Alex, a fantasy, and it's going to burst. He finally paused his rant to actually look at the prop in his hand. He tilted it toward the light to see the face he was so gleefully mocking. My mother was still looking at me, her face a mask of pleading concern, wondering why I had suddenly gone bone white, why I was shaking, why a single silent tear of rage was carving a track down my cheek. "Mark?" she said, her voice small and uncertain. "Mark, what is it?" "You're—" My father's arm froze mid-gesture. The magazine was perfectly still. His knuckles wrapped around the spine were as white as his face had suddenly become. He wasn't breathing. He just stared. He stared at the cover, his eyes wide, his jaw slack, tracing the bold white headline printed across the bottom. A headline printed directly beneath a high-definition, professionally shot photograph of me, not in a faded band shirt, but in a crisp, dark sweater, my arms crossed, looking directly into the camera with an expression of cold, quiet confidence. And beneath my face, the words that would end the dinner party, the intervention, and my entire childhood, all at once. Alex Vance, the garage architect of the new internet. His poor job? Try a $1.2 billion valuation. The sound that broke the silence wasn't a shout. It was a slap. The glossy magazine slipped from my father's nerveless fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, echoing report, landing face up. My face staring at the ceiling. My father staggered back, his hand flying to his chest as if he'd been shot, a low, strangled gasp escaping his lips. He fumbled for his armchair and collapsed into it, the heavy brocade groaning under his weight. He looked ancient, all the bluster and certainty, all the patriarchal confidence, completely vacuum-sealed out of him. "Mark!" my mother cried, rushing to his side, her mind still on the intervention, probably assuming he was having a heart attack. "Mark, what is it? Breathe." "Alex, call 911!" But my father just shook his head, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on the magazine lying on the floor between us like a grenade that had finally, impossibly, detonated. He couldn't speak. He could only point. His thick, trembling finger was aimed at my face on the cover. My mother, confused, followed his gaze. She bent down, her knees cracking, and picked up the magazine. She held it close to her face, her reading glasses still perched on her head. "What? I don't—" She fumbled for her glasses, pulling them down over her eyes. She read the headline. She read it again. And then she read it a third time, her mouth moving silently, her brain refusing to process the words, the number, 1.2, she whispered, her voice a thin, reedy wisp. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with a terrifying new kind of confusion, an emotion I had never seen on her face. It wasn't pity. It wasn't concern. It was raw, unfiltered awe, mixed with a dawning, sickening horror. Alex, it's a joke, right? A computer? A trick? My father finally found his voice. It was a dry, rasping thing, a hollow echo of his usual boom. It's a prank, he declared, though his eyes pleaded with me to agree. It's a novelty print. A very, very cruel joke, Alex. You paid for this. The room was so quiet I could hear the antique grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, each talk a hammer blow against the fragile new reality. I felt the single tear finally dry on my cheek, the rage it represented evaporating, leaving behind a cold, desolate calm. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times, the screaming, the "I told you so," the triumphant speech. But now that it was here, all I felt was tired. I bent down, picked up my napkin from the floor, and slowly wiped my mouth. It's not a joke, Dad, I said, my voice shockingly even. It hit the newsstands this morning. We closed the Series B funding round on Tuesday. The valuation was confirmed by 3 independent firms. I looked at my mother, who was now clutching the magazine to her chest like a shield. The tinkering was me building a decentralized encrypted data protocol. The poor job was me acting as CEO of a company that now has over 40 employees and 200 million active users. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, letting them settle on the cold pot roast and the untouched coffee. The funny money is worth $1.2 billion. My father's face went through a rapid, painful series of calculations. I could see the gears turning as he tried to reconcile the son he mocked with the man on the cover. He was trying to find a flaw, a lie, a way for his world to still make sense. But, the dental plan, he whispered, the words sounding utterly absurd, a relic from a different, simpler universe. You always wore those terrible t-shirts. As if to punctuate the absurdity, my phone, which I'd set to silent for the intervention, began to vibrate on the table. It buzzed once, then again a long, insistent, angry hum against the wood. It was a physical manifestation of the outside world, the real world, smashing its way into this beige prison of a dining room. It lit up. A text from my COO in Singapore. Forbes is live. Brace for impact. Another from my publicist. Good Morning America is calling. CBS is calling. Everyone is calling. Do not talk to Greg. And then, as if summoned by the gods of irony, the screen lit up with an incoming call. The name on the screen caused my father to flinch as if he'd seen a snake. Greg. My cousin. My golden boy, paralegal offering, sensible sedan driving cousin. I looked at my parents, their faces frozen in matching masks of stunned disbelief. I held up the phone so they could see the name. Then I answered it. I put it on speakerphone. Alex? Greg's voice was high, strained, a weird mix of fake congratulations and panic. Hey, man. Buddy, I just saw the thing. The magazine. Wow, man. That's insane. I had no idea. I leaned back in my chair, the first real, genuine feeling of power I'd ever felt in this house washing over me. Hey, Greg? Yeah, it's been a busy morning. Look, I'm kind of in the middle of a family meeting. What's up? There was a nervous laugh on the other end. Oh, yeah, sure. Listen, I was just calling to, well, obviously, forget that paralegal thing. Ha, God, that's embarrassing. I was actually wondering, my firm, we do a lot of tech IP law. A lot. And I was thinking, with this billion-dollar valuation, you're going to need someone good. Someone you can trust. Someone who's, family. I let the word family hang in the air, tasting the bitter hypocrisy of it. I looked at my father, who had sunk so low in his chair he looked like a deflating balloon. I looked at my mother, who was just crying silently, tears of confusion and shame streaming down her face, staining the glossy cover of the magazine she still held. Greg, I said, my voice suddenly as cold and sharp as surgical steel. Send my assistant your resume. I'll have my actual legal team take a look at it. I'll call you back. Maybe. I hung up before he could reply. The click of the phone disconnecting was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The intervention was over. The family I knew was gone. In its place were two strangers, staring at a billionaire who looked just like their son. For a full minute, the only sound in the room was the tock, tock, tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had measured out every disappointing Sunday dinner of my adult life. Now, it just sounded like a countdown to an execution. My mother's hand, the one not clutching the magazine, was at her throat, her pearls suddenly looking like a choke chain. "Alex?" she finally whispered, and my name sounded alien in her mouth. It wasn't the name of her son, the failure. It was a question. "Alex, why didn't you tell us?" The question was so perfectly, predictably them that I almost laughed. It wasn't congratulations. It wasn't, "I'm so proud of you." It was an accusation. "Why did you let us make fools of ourselves? Why did you deceive us?" She was already rewriting the narrative, painting herself and my father as the victims of my secrecy, not the perpetrators of their own judgment. You just sat there," she continued, her voice gaining a hysterical edge. You let us worry. You let us, oh God, Mark, the teller job. She couldn't finish, her face collapsing into her hands, the magazine falling into her lap, my glossy face staring up at her, unforgiving. My father, however, was finding his anger. It was his last, most reliable defense. He pushed himself up from the armchair, his knuckles white, his face a terrifying shade of mottled purple. "$1 billion, he hissed, the word sounding like acid. $1 billion. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the magazine, at the number, as if it had personally assaulted him. So this was all a game? A lie? He advanced on me, his finger jabbing at the air. "You came into my house. You ate my food. You let me slip you $100. $100. You pretended to be a bum. You did this to humiliate us." He was shouting now, the sound bouncing off the high, polite ceilings. "You made us look like fools." The rage finally broke the cold dam inside me. I stood up slowly, not in anger, but in finality. "No, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through his, sharp and quiet, and absolutely devoid of the fear he was used to hearing. "I didn't make you look like anything. I just let you." I looked at his enraged, confused face, and for the first time, I didn't see a father. I saw a small man, terrified of anything he couldn't measure. "You wanted me to be a failure. You needed it. It made your world make sense. It made Greg's 3 Series BMW and his boring job seem like the pinnacle of human achievement." I turned to my mother, who was watching this, horrified, as if two strangers were arguing in her living room. "You weren't worried about me, Mom. You were embarrassed by me. You weren't offering me a dental plan out of love. You were offering it so you could finally have something to say about me at your bridge club. You didn't care if I was happy. You just cared if I was normal." I walked past my father toward the front door. The scent of pot roast was choking me. "You laughed," I said, my back to them. "Both of you. Every Sunday. You laughed at my poor job. You laughed at my clothes. You laughed at my tinkering. You laughed because you couldn't be bothered to listen. You couldn't be bothered to ask one single genuine question about what I was doing. It was easier to laugh. It was easier to pity," my father sputtered. We were trying to help you, to save you from this." "Save me from what?" I spun around, and I felt the last thread connecting me to this house, to this life, just snap. "Save me from a $1.2 billion valuation? Save me from changing the face of digital security? Save me from the cover of Forbes?" I held up my phone, which was still buzzing, a relentless, vibrating scream from the real world. "You weren't trying to save me. You were trying to stuff me back into the tiny little beige box you live in, and I just don't fit anymore." My mother stood up, her face a mess of tears and mascara. "Alex, please," she begged. Don't go. We can celebrate. I'll open that champagne, the one we were saving for Greg's." For Greg's? She trailed off, the lie dying in her throat. We're your family. We love you. I looked at her and the anger was gone, replaced by an abyss of sadness. You love the idea of me. You love the idea of a son you can brag about. You didn't love the son who was tinkering in the garage. You were ashamed of him. I pulled my keys from my pocket, and that's the part I'll never forget. You didn't laugh because you thought I was poor. You laughed because you hoped I was. I opened the front door. The cool, clean night air rushed in, sweeping away the smell of disappointment and old gravy. My driver, a man I paid a six-figure salary, was waiting for me in a black Maybach, a car worth more than their house. The funny money, Dad, I said, pausing in the doorway, is listing on the NASDAQ next month. I'll send you an invitation to the bell ringing. Maybe you can frame it. I looked back at them one last time. They looked like statues in a museum of their own obsolete opinions, frozen in the warm light of their dining room, the magazine on the floor between them. They weren't laughing now. God, they weren't laughing at all. By the way, I added, a final cold thought. The dental plan at my company? It's incredible. It covers everything. Implants, veneers, even gold. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it gently. The click of the latch, the final quiet end to the joke.